Somewhere right now, a young couple is sitting at their kitchen table, staring at numbers that no longer make sense. They've done everything right. Stable jobs, decent savings, careful spending. And yet, the one thing their parents could achieve in their 20s, a simple home, feels completely out of reach. This isn't just happening in one city or one country. From New York to London, from Toronto to Sydney, something has fundamentally changed. Buying a house is no longer just difficult. For millions of people, it's becoming impossible. And the uncomfortable truth is, this isn't happening by accident. For decades, homeownership was considered the cornerstone of stability. In the United States, especially after World War II, buying a house became a symbol of success and security. Governments supported it, banks encouraged it, and wages were, at least for a time, closely tied to housing costs. But fast forward to today, and the equation has broken down. According to widely reported housing data, in many major cities, home prices have risen more than 2 to 3 times faster than average incomes over the past 2 decades. In some places, it's even worse. The central question is no longer when you can buy a home. It's whether you'll ever be able to at all. And to understand why, you have to look beyond supply and demand into the systems quietly reshaping the housing market from the inside. One of the biggest shifts happened in the early 2000s, but most people didn't notice it at the time. Housing stopped being just a place to live and became something else entirely: a financial asset. Large investment firms, hedge funds, and institutional buyers began entering the housing market at scale. After the 2008 financial crisis, when millions of homes were foreclosed, these institutions bought properties in bulk, often at discounted prices. Entire neighborhoods, once filled with individual homeowners, started quietly shifting into the hands of corporations. Reports suggest that in some U.S. regions, institutional investors now own a significant percentage of single-family rental homes. And here's the part most people don't realize. These buyers don't behave like families. They operate with algorithms, data models, and long-term profit strategies. They can outbid regular buyers, often paying in cash, pushing prices higher before everyday people even get a chance to compete. And this was just the beginning. But rising prices aren't only about who is buying homes. It's also about how the system rewards holding them. In many countries, housing is treated as one of the safest investments available. Tax incentives, low interest rates in the past decade, and limited regulation have made it highly attractive to own multiple properties. This created a feedback loop. As more investors entered the market, prices increased. And as prices increased, more investors were drawn in, expecting future gains. What's counterintuitive is that even when new homes are built, it doesn't always solve the problem. In some cases, new developments are purchased before they're even completed, not by families, but by investors looking to store wealth. Entire apartment blocks can sit partially empty, not because there's no demand, but because ownership has shifted away from people who actually need housing. The assumption has always been that more supply would fix affordability. But the evidence increasingly shows that who controls that supply matters just as much. At this point, it starts to feel like the system is tilted. But the real turning point, the one that quietly accelerated everything, came from a place most people rarely question: the cost of money itself. For over a decade following the financial crisis, interest rates in many countries were kept historically low. This made borrowing cheaper, which in theory should have made housing more accessible. But in reality, it had a different effect. Cheap money didn't just help buyers. It supercharged investors. With access to low-cost capital, large firms could borrow billions and deploy it into real estate, acquiring properties at a scale individual buyers could never match. At the same time, low rates allowed people to stretch their budgets further, bidding higher and higher just to secure a home. The result was a surge in prices that outpaced income growth even more aggressively. Then, when interest rates began rising again in the early 2020s, the situation became even more complex. Suddenly, mortgages became more expensive, locking many potential buyers out of the market entirely. But prices didn't drop in proportion. Instead, the gap between what people earn and what homes cost widened even further. For a first-time buyer, it's not just about saving for a deposit anymore. It's about competing in a system where the rules have fundamentally changed. And this is where things become even more uncomfortable. Because when you step back and look at the full picture, a pattern starts to emerge. Housing is no longer driven purely by human need. It's increasingly influenced by global capital flows, financial strategies, and policy decisions that were never designed with affordability as the primary goal. This doesn't mean there's a single cause or a single group responsible. The reality is more complex. Limited land in major cities, zoning restrictions, construction costs, population growth, and economic policies all play a role. But the combined effect is clear. In many parts of the world, homeownership is shifting from being a standard life milestone to a privilege that fewer people can realistically achieve. And perhaps the most overlooked detail is this. When housing becomes an investment first and a necessity second, the priorities of the system begin to change. Stability gives way to profitability. Over time, that shift becomes harder to reverse. Because once an entire system is built around rising property values, slowing that growth can have consequences for banks, investors, and even national economies. So the cycle continues even as affordability slips further out of reach for ordinary people. So where does that leave the average person? For some, it means adapting, renting longer, moving further away from city centers, or redefining what homeownership looks like entirely. For others, it raises a bigger question about how housing should function in the future. Should it remain primarily an investment, or should it be treated more like essential infrastructure? There's no simple answer, and the debate is far from settled. But one thing is certain. The dream of owning a home is changing, and the reasons behind it run deeper than most people realize. The real question is, do you think homeownership will ever become accessible again for the average person? Or are we witnessing a permanent shift in how the world lives? Let me know what you think. And if you want more deep, eye-opening breakdowns like this, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching.